Видишь? Скажи, что ты сгорела.
Что, только что прям сгорел?
По-моему, да. Что-то новое такое сидит. Это дает жесткую тень.
Да, это очень яркий. Его надо так, только... Я прямо после него смотреть не могу.
Не-не-не. Мы тебя просто ослепим. Мы можем типа вот просто отраженный поставить от потолка на самом деле. Сейчас только сейчас пошли тени. Вот тени. Хуёво. Сейчас. Секунду. Ну как-то так.
Чик.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Jak sprawy?
Sprawy dobre. Good, good. We have 15 minutes. Yeah, but we are
Okay.
already live on YouTube because I
Okay.
don't know how to manage it another way. So I prepared everything and now it goes straight there. So
Yeah.
we can prepare, but just remember that maybe
Be
some people
mindful.
are already there.
Okay, that's good to know. How
Yeah.
unusual.
Yeah, let's try to show some video. I want to see how it goes.
Yes, 1 second. I'm just trying to grab.
О боже. О боже. Это YouTube. Just a moment. It's YouTube. It's YouTube, and we go this. Okay.
I'm just closing every window that has ever been open in my
Yeah.
screen.
It's
Okay, so let's try.
Ну, конечно. Ну, Дэн, глянь на картинку. Посмотри.
Темно.
Вот с этой стороны, да?
Сейчас сделаю.
Вот с этой, да?
Да.
Может быть.
Oh,
We are going. Just a moment.
Вот так, Антон, посмотри.
Сейчас. Ну. Сильно ярко. Конечно,
And-
лучше, да, отраженный, но у нас отраженный никак не получается.
Ну, отраженный я могу только сделать кого-нибудь.
Не, на стенку больше, на это, да.
Ну, ладно.
Да, а если я ближе туда сяду? Конечно.
Ну да.
I haven't gone far away, Anton. I'm just making a cup of tea.
А ну попробуй. А ну. Чтобы он не свалился только оттуда во время трансляции.
Переноску. Сейчас.
We just need to arrange some light.
That's all right. I'm just arranging some things anyway.
Okay.
Not that one.
Погляди на меня.
Мне больше так нравится.
Вот там.
Так. Ну, есть мягкая тень, если тебя это
Ну, мягкая тень не страшно.
напрягает, давай я сяду. Но мне кажется, что стало на место.
А с той стороны видно из-за вот этой стеночки, видишь?
Я там все там получается.
Сейчас.
Покажи последнюю картинку.
Видишь вот этот угол?
Темный.
Угу.
Понял.
Может быть, мне все-таки сюда больше.
Да.
То же самое, он тоже так. И
ты его камеру просто поверни. Да. Просто убери это. Вообще,
вот так сейчас
темную
нету.
тень сейчас. О!
Сейчас немножко есть.
Смотри,
Тень.
вот.
А ну подсвети вот эту лампочку крайнюю.
Просто повернуть на тебя.
Сюда. Чуть она смягчит ее. Ну, вот так, может быть. Да. И проверь теперь, пожалуйста. Вот это, конечно, уже криво пошло. Вот так я приблизительно, да, в кадре?
Ты по центру хочешь или как?
Да.
По центру камеры. Ну вот так сейчас посмотри. Ну мне нравится тут мягко.
А ну сядь.
На эту камеру. Чуть-чуть рисковато в зуме получается.
Да, здесь хорошо.
Вот.
Так, чуть-чуть здесь. Так,
Чуть.
берем. Ну, сиди.
Ну вот типа так.
Ну, да. Посиди, не подвижу.
Угу.
Есть.
Можем ту еще одну. Вот где повернуть. Ну, будет резче тени. Да?
Я думаю, что так.
Да?
Так, хорошо, выведу. Всё, это у нас 10 минут.
На всякий случай покажи мне, что тут нажимать.
Включается вот это?
Каждый раз просто
Да,
сбрасывать.
да. Оно когда вырубает, ну ты знаешь, когда записывать, там,
Точечка, конечно.
когда тухнет, оно сразу пишет, да?
Я
Ну,
просто
надо
заново
включить.
нажимаю.
Да. Когда оно, если оно вот так тухнет,
Мгм.
то через это.
Через черненькое. Понял, все.
Там
Ясно,
режим
ясно.
спящего. Это уходит, да, так.
Спящего медведя.
Сейчас хорошо. Чуть там, вот, кстати, вообще
Ну вот это
нету,
лучше. Вот это, кстати,
вообще
лучше.
нету
Вот
тени.
это, кстати, лучше. О! Чуть-чуть, если бы ниже тебя. Чуть-чуть. Да, аккуратненько.
Чуть-чуть больше.
Больше чуть-чуть. Если вот это вот убрать паразитную фигню.
Там чуть-чуть в углу. Ну пусть будет, пусть даже будет видно чуть-чуть. Кресло не страшно. Ну. О!
Ну вот лучше.
Типа вот так, да?
Лучше. Стало
Сейчас
лучше.
вообще никаких теней нету
Не, вот это
за
стало
спиной.
лучше.
И там только выстави.
Сейчас, секунду.
Опять меня обратно на центр.
Ага, да, потому что сейчас ты, конечно, где-то уехал. Если тут будет часть стены видна, не страшно?
Я думаю, не страшно. Там можно, если что, чуть приблизить. Его
Не,
можно,
не,
опять
не.
же, его можно чуть переставить.
А приближать его я не уверен, честно говоря. А ну сядь, как ты будешь сидеть. А ну посмотри сейчас. Мне нравится, но ты посмотри просто. Нравится, что там фактуры разные.
Да.
Да?
Все. Так, это подключено. Сейчас наберу на всякий случай Стасу. А ну, сфотографируй.
Тебя?
Отправь Стасе. Вопросе. Да. Волнуется, хорошо ли мы свет поставили. А ты отправишь ей?
Ну, конечно, да. Сейчас отправляем.
How are you?
Good.
Still figuring out? Shall I test my sound?
Yeah. We are ready.
Okay. All right. I'll test sharing, and I want to particularly make sure you can hear the sound because I've got headphones in.
Let's try.
So share computer sound. Hopefully this helps. Although, let me know. Okay. You can see my screen.
Yeah.
The sound takes a while.
Yeah, it goes.
Yeah. And you can hear?
Yes.
This music?
Yeah.
Great. Fantastic.
Okay, so we're kind of ready.
Oh, what have I done? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for the video. Yesterday we all Sweet.
Yeah, well, Michael Smith put it all together, and oh goodness, we've been so wanting to do that for such a long time. I can't believe it's been over a year since I was
It
in
takes you
Ukraine.
almost a year. I just wanted to say.
It's crazy. It only took a year. It only took a year. Oh, but it's so interesting. It was so amazing to watch that and realize what amazing experience that was. And that space, that stunning space. So yeah. What a different world we were living in 1 year ago as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I will start right at 11 Kyiv time in 4 minutes. And I will start with greetings to the audience. And
yes, sounds good.
then I'm going to show a very short presentation video which I made for you, the English version. And after this, we can start. I mean, video, then my greetings, and then we start.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Lovely.
I will check my video.
Hello to all that have joined. Oh yes, I'll be back in 1 second. I promise. I promise.
Yeah, it's okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, this is it. So 2 minutes left.
Welcome to everyone that is joining us so far, the early birds. I'll share a Facebook post in our 2 minutes. I feel like that might be a good spending of time, Anton.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anton Ovchinnikov from Kyiv, Ukraine. Выключи, пожалуйста.
Liesel ZINK, австралійська хореографка, перформер.
Так. Okay. Sorry, we'll start again. Hi, everybody. I'm Anton Ovchinnikov from Kyiv, Ukraine, and now we start our second interview with dance artists from different countries all over the world. Our second guest is Liesel ZINK from Australia, Brisbane, who was the guest of the Ukrainian International Contemporary Dance Festival Zelonka Space Up last year, where she created the work called We and the Uncertain. And I'm happy to greeting Liesel today for the interview. Good morning or good afternoon, Liesel.
Yes. Good morning, good evening to everyone in Australia, and dobry den to everyone in Ukraine. It's lovely to be here.
How are you? How are you doing? What's going on there in Australia?
Yeah, it's a strange time in Australia, I guess, around the world, indeed, with kind of COVID-19. I think it's quite interesting because a lot of my work, I'm usually traveling very fortunately around Australia and the world, but actually I've been very much home this year. And it's actually been quite nice to be grounded. And big questions about art in this time. So I'm really glad to be having this conversation with you. Yeah.
Okay.
And how are you, Anton?
Yeah. And so I want to start with a question about your family, because we met first time we met here in Ukraine, and when we met, you told me that you have the Ukrainian ancestors. Part of your family were living in Ukraine many years ago. Do you still feel this connection with Ukraine? Can you say some words about your grandparents, how this happened? They left Ukraine, and what happened then?
Yeah, I feel a strong connection to Ukraine, and particularly the Ukrainian culture, which I feel like particularly my aunties and Nana and Poppy held on to very strong in Australia. So my Nana grew up north of Kiev, and my Poppy grew up in near Lviv. Excuse me, sorry, I'm just going to turn my notifications off. It's just my mum checking how to watch. So they grew up in Ukraine, but during World War II, both in their own different way, kind of were transported to Germany, and then eventually found themselves in Australia, where they, my Nana had two daughters, and with someone overseas, and then came to us, who unfortunately passed away in the war, and then came to Australia, met my grandfather, my Poppy, who was also Ukrainian, and had my mother and my uncle. So yeah, I think I have it's such an interesting thing. I think Australia, we're very grateful to be on the land of, for me, the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people and our First Nations people, but it has a very interesting history with migrant culture. So it's very interesting to think about this sense of belonging. And I remember when I came to Ukraine for the first time, and I do have some of my mother's cousins in Ukraine, it was this huge, strong sense of belonging, like the smell and the delicious smazhno, varaniki, and borscht, and it was so lovely, and the strong folk art. It felt like I was walking into my Nana's lounge room. But then, someone would say hello, like talk to me, and I realized that actually I had this feeling of going, I belong in Ukraine. This is where I belong. and then all of a sudden, you know, someone talking to me and realizing, wow, actually I don't know the language at all, and I am just this kind of foreign object here. So I think it is very interesting to think about sense how we connect with place. It's very interesting, that conversation in Australia, and realizing it's what an important thing is to go back to our ancestral roots. And actually, one thing I've been doing, sorry, I get distracted any opportunity to show off these, but my auntie every year, she makes pasanki. So I've been doing some pasanki. I know we're talking about dance. I'm getting distracted here already.
It's okay. It's amazing.
There's something very special, I think, about doing this art that maybe a long time ago my nana's nana would have been doing. But
Great.
yes, that was also why it was so special to come to Ukraine last year and work with Ukrainian people, dancers, and yeah. So yeah,
And
don't get me started about this.
did you ever dance Ukrainian folk dances? Because I know that Ukrainian communities all over the world, they try to keep this Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian roots live. Did you ever try dancing Ukrainian folk dances in Australia?
Well, actually, my auntie used to teach Ukrainian folk dance, but I myself, no, I didn't. But when I was over there in Ukraine last year, the dancers kindly taught me a little bit of Ukrainian folk dancing while in a bar in Kiev. So that was probably my introduction to Ukrainian dancing. Yeah.
I suppose it was very funny, and yeah.
Yeah.
So how it happened with you to become a dancer? How did you make the decision to start dancing professionally?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I actually grew up in a small town called Bowral in New South Wales in Australia, and it's probably about, at that time, a kind of 3-hour train trip to Sydney. And there I only kind of did ballet classes, but I was very I loved it. I was even the only person in my class, and I would travel on the train to Sydney a lot to do ballet classes. But I guess I was exposed to this amazing platform that invited people from in year 11 and 12 of school to kind of make performances. It was called the State Dance Company. And it was very embracing of people from regional communities. And I thought, oh, I didn't realize you could do dance at university. So I moved to Brisbane, where I still live now, which is a very sunny, tropical, subtropical, almost tropical place, not quite, but warmer than Ukraine maybe. And I moved here. I studied for 3 years at university, and have been practicing ever since. But I think what has always kind of struck me as quite interesting is, particularly growing up in a small town, kind of almost this tension with contemporary dance. And I feel like at training, I always had a little bit of a tension with maybe contemporary dance. I saw some incredible contemporary dance, but it was for contemporary dance audiences, and kind of thinking, well, there are so many more audiences out there that we could access or talk to or connect with. And I think that that has really kind of stuck with me throughout my whole career. So yeah.
Okay. And then I want to go to talk about your works. Just yesterday I checked again. I knew a lot about your works, and yesterday I checked again your website, and I saw there that probably mostly all of your works was made for open spaces, for public spaces, for non-conventional spaces, and many of them has this. They kind of indicate your very big interest to social relations between people in the society. So how did you make this decision? How did you come to? So I see you have your own way to do performances, your own interest for research and dance. So how did you come to this interest? Because Australia actually for me seems a kind of trouble-free country, you know, at least for us, you know, not like Ukraine or East European country where we have all of these small or big revolutions during the end of 20th century. So Australia seems like quite calm country, but still you came to this idea to research the social relationships with dance. How did you come to this?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, because many times I've questioned what this motivation is myself. But I think I feel like I've always been very interested in using my practice to contribute to something, to change something, to kind of be part of something larger. And I actually, one of the first works that I did in public space, it started off really fascinated with body language and how as humans we communicate through our bodies, and then how in peak hour traffic we shut off in a way, like our kind of body language shuts off and we are quite stern, and we have these rules that we live by in terms of the distance that people kind of hold around a space. So if someone kind of enters our intimate space, like that's 15 centimeters in Australia, kind of going, our body kind of shuts off and we make sure we look at our phone and don't make eye contact, we don't smile. And so I am getting to your question, one of the first pieces that I did was actually in outdoors in a big way, was actually in peak hour traffic, in pedestrian traffic, and really looking at, well, if this is the way that we behave in this space, how can I place dancers in this space to almost as a little bit of a social experiment to kind of perhaps encourage people to disrupt, kind of almost like a little creative disruption in that space. How can I encourage people to smile in that space, or how can I get them to, like, if someone falls over, do they show care and compassion and step out of what they do? So this work kind of looked at that. But what became really interesting about that performance was actually we stayed in the space for 3 weeks. Wow. So every day we would be at this train station, we would be doing our, doing our contemporary dance, and there would just be this flood of people coming by, kind of walking through the turnstiles down to the train station. And what became really fascinating to me was how the space changed over 3 weeks. So the first week was kind of very, it was like agitated, like who are these strange people in our space? Then the next week they it was a little bit more gentle, kind of going, oh, okay, they're not a threat. They're not going to kind of involve us in their artwork or engage us or kind of intimidate us. And then by the third week, they actually were like, what are you doing? What's this? And they kind of started to get involved. And for me, what became really interesting, this was during a time where there was a lot of Occupy movement protests happening worldwide, or, particularly in the United States, but coming over into Australia a bit. And that was quite a forceful resistance, which I feel like can be really important. But there was something very interesting about going, wow, this is a very gentle and persistent resistance that we've done by just kind of placing creativity in this space over time, and how actually it's opened up conversation. And for me, actually, that was the entry point. I think I've always been quite a socially conscious person, but for me, that was actually a real entry point and a kind of moment of my art meeting my desire to find ways to improve the world, and kind of thinking about how we can protest, or perhaps through persistent resistance, make larger change.
Yeah.
And I think I could go on for a long time, but it's very interesting to think about protest in Australia. And at that time, I had quite a lot of frustrations with it. You know, perhaps we are very relaxed, and we are a very fortunate nation in many ways, but also there are definitely some things that we still need to be kind of fighting for, and how do we thinking about kind of particularly like our refugees or our kind of First Nations community, how do we activate and energize people to go to the streets, to make a change, to like, how do we, in this relaxed state, how do we stand for a better world, I think.
And coming back to your work, you said that this was 3 weeks, and at the third week you saw that the space were changed, a kind of changed. People changed their attitude to dancers, to space itself. And do you think it's because it was kind of the same people each day go in this space, or probably there's a kind of energy because you were doing this action in this space, and this action can actually change the space itself and the energy of the space, and change the relationships between the space and the people who cross it every day?
Yeah, I think it's I think there's a little bit of both. I think it's something really but mostly the latter. By placing bodies in a space and an artwork in a space, it can automatically kind of transform our experience of that space and turn it into one of reflection. And what's quite interesting is I feel like when I create work, which I predominantly do in quite busy urban spaces, often it's just there's so much choreography in that space that it is people kind of walking past, bikes zooming past, and kind of going, actually, how, like, maybe the dancer is still, and how do I as a choreographer place bodies in the space to allow us to see the space better? And I think I think so. I guess I think I've just gone off track a little bit. But in terms of thinking about your question, kind of going, I feel like what was the question again?
It's okay, Liesel. Don't worry. I'm just thinking that, you know, there is a kind of in these kind of performances, the dance can actually make people pay more attention to what's going on around them, just to start looking around and watching and seeing, and that helps. And this is actually the thing that can change the space itself and can make public spaces be more spaces for people, not just spaces where people just passing, you know, but they also have this possibility to communicate in some ways, not just be in their own bubbles, but still feel this sharing the space with other people. That was my question about.
Yeah, and I think that is really interesting to think about, you know, that public space can be, it's a shared space, and it attracts people that are of diverse age and cultures and experiences, and much more diverse than might kind of go to a theatre space. And for me, that really interests me, and these shared spaces, and kind of going, how I feel like actually now more than ever we need to think about how can we create spaces for shared experience, and what I find quite amazing about these spaces as well is not only they can encourage people to stop and watch, but also it's a very relaxed space. There's not the codes of the theatre, so people can kind of go, what are you doing? What's this? Oh, it's an artwork, it's about this. Oh, okay. Oh, actually I was at that protest, I recognize this sound, or they can talk to each other, and it's kind of and they feel comfortable to be able to watch and talk, and even if they watch for 3 minutes 30 seconds, or some people have stopped and watched for 6 hours in one of my performances, you know, and it,
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And then my next question is about your work, the stance. This is actually the work which you proposed to create in Kiev when we met for the first time. And I saw that you did different versions of this work in different countries. And this work actually is very much connected with the public protests in public spaces. And it's very much influenced, and actually the work itself research the human bodies and the protests actions. So can you tell me something about how this idea come to your mind to start this research and do this work?
Yeah, it's a work. Actually, I started it probably 2014 or even slightly earlier, thinking about it. But the very starting point for me was I was doing a lot of reading into social identity theories and how, and emergence theories in kind of social psychology, how actually social change doesn't necessarily come from the top, but comes from these multitudes of actions that kind of an uprising that can, like the French Revolution, or even thinking about Maidan kind of movement in Ukraine as well.
Yeah.
And that was very empowering and inspiring to me, and going, yes, you know, I can stand next to you and you can stand next to me. We have the same beliefs and we can change the world. But then I actually attended a protest in Australia, and we had our signs and we marched down the street, and I stopped and I got like a bottle of water from the shop, and I said, oh, is the protest disrupting you? And they said, oh no, they're there all the time, I don't know what it's about. Just kind of going, wow, like, has protest become such a recognizable form of activism that it's not working anymore in Australia? So I was very interested in this tension between feeling incredibly powerful but perhaps powerless as well. And it's quite interesting because actually in Brisbane, in Queensland in the 1970s, it was illegal to protest. So people decided to go down to the streets and protest anyway, and they sat and they got arrested. And I'm kind of was interested in that space, that actual physical space, and thinking about, well, what makes us passionate, and what point do we put our body on the line for something we believe in? So it kind of came from a lot of these questions, and maybe I should show some video as well. But what's been quite interesting about the process is I created on different in collaboration with different communities in each different place that I've presented it. So this has been with young people. Our youngest person is 8, up until mature dance movers. So our oldest performer has been 72 years of age. And each different place we go, we research local protest, and those kind of conversations and research come into the sound design and the choreography itself. So I'll show you a little bit of this.
Yeah, good.
So here we go. And I should say also it is actually a duration work. So at times it's the longest it's been is 9 hours. So it's really kind of looking at this idea of duration, but also the sound is all delivered over headphones. So in a way it might be that someone might walk across and sorry, I'm playing with that idea of invisible in the space. So people might walk and go, oh, what's this? It's quite strange. And then they get access to the sound, and the work kind of and world opens up to them a little bit. So yeah, here we go. So this is in Sydney. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
So-
and I have a question right after I saw it. Do you expect actually anything particular from the audience to feel when they watch this kind of performances? What is your expectations except just doing research around the choreographies, the body, and then presented it on the street? What are you waiting for?
Well, I think for me, it's actually about a conversation and a dialogue. And I think actually the power of dance is that it can have really strong imagery, and the body comes with vulnerabilities and needs. And what I've found with this work is actually simply by placing these kind of bodies in space and these images that we've drawn from local and global protests, they can actually provoke really strong imagery from the audience themselves. So a lot of people have come up and said, I was in that protest, you know, even, or like kind of, they can understand and they can resonate. Or someone said, I listened to that speech and I went down and I got arrested there. And, or someone kind of saying, in Korea was talking about, they said they stumbled across a performance and they spoke to one of the dancers for a while in Korean. I couldn't understand, but they said, I just realized actually it's time for me to let go. And without knowing what that means, somehow these images can actually be abstract but meaningful enough to provoke things in people. And then I think what this really important thing for me is being available to speak to people about that as well. Yeah, but I also do think there are some people that might kind of see it and go, oh wow, there was this crazy dance thing in the, you know, that I saw outside when I was going for lunch. And actually maybe that's also just as valuable for people to see art more often, and so the experience can be very varied. And actually I quite like that, and I welcome those different levels of engagement. Yeah.
Good. The work you did in Kiev, the We and the Uncertain, I haven't been presented at the rehearsals. I didn't see how you made it, but I heard a lot of feedbacks from dancers who participated in that performance, that they had so many insights. They were so much influenced by the rehearsal process itself. So I don't know, but I suppose that you work a lot with the dancers, with their own material, with their own thoughts and ideas, and it's very interesting. How did you build this work? What was inside the work? What was the body of the work, except what people saw, what the audience saw?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I love about choreography, and particularly choreographing across culture or across generation, or people with different experience to mine, is actually the meeting of our two, like the creativity. The work that I'm interested in is not necessarily me telling others what to do, but instead kind of going, I have this idea, and then seeing what their stories are in relation to that. And then in the middle, we meet and we find something new that neither of us could have created in isolation. And I think in Ukraine, we started off, I mean, I was very interested in this idea of uncertainty, which I think is even more relevant at this moment in time.
Yeah, that's true. Now it's even more relevant.
Yeah, and just thinking about how do humans respond and support each other through times of uncertainty, and then having that incredible space and visual artwork to respond to. I think a lot we kind of, and then the dancers, so there were quite a few elements in there, but I kind of came with this idea of uncertainty and interest in the space. And then we had a lot of conversation, like what are times, what are their stories in relation to uncertainty? What do we feel about the space? And together we kind of felt like this space in a way almost was in, it had a really thick smell of dust and kind of in a dark kind of corner, almost like it had been forgotten. But then also in our process, we had a lot of conversations about our shared Ukrainian stories. Actually, particularly had a wonderful opportunity to chat to Flora about her grandparents' story, and then sharing my kind of stories that we had, and this idea in a way of kind of going almost this space just needed a little bit of life and shaking up and disruption to allow the kind of almost like blow the past out the window and let it kind of settle. And because there was something interesting about going, what is it that pulls me back to Ukraine to come and work with these people? But yeah, for me, I feel like the creative process is one of the most amazing and important spaces. And one of the spaces, as I move further into my practice, for me, just kind of going, actually, maybe this is one of the things that we can offer as dancers and artists to broader public as well, is a space where of a creative process where we share stories, we listen to each other, we check in with how we're feeling, we reflect upon what's going on in the world, and we make a shared something together. And actually recognizing that that can be a very therapeutic, but also supportive, resilient space of building community, and that has real value. Yeah. I don't know if I should share the video of what.
Yeah. Can you share the
Okay.
short fragment? Yeah, probably it will be interesting for the audience.
Not the whole.
Not the whole, yeah, just 2-3 minutes.
Oh, here we go. And maybe I'll talk over if it's not too loud. So thank you, Michael Smith, for editing this video. Can you hear me talking over this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this was the starting space that we got to work with, and the artwork by Roman Mikhailov, I believe, and the gorgeous dancers. But yeah, so this was the kind of space that we were working in, and the audience were to come in. And I think what was really interesting was not only about this kind of space, but also the one in kind of this intimate space with the audience and quite dark. But then also thinking about the contrasting space outside, which I will show you very shortly. And a lot of these dancers actually hadn't worked together before. But
Yeah.
These two just going, wow, they look like they've been duo partners for ages. And we really made it in about 2.5 weeks, really.
Yeah, that all looks like you were working together at least 2 months, not 2 weeks.
Yeah. I'll fast forward a little bit. And yeah, a lot of it was just kind of spending time in the space and looking at the objects in the space, one of which was these kind of bricks that were in the corners. It's such an honor to work and privilege to work across cultures. And, you know, a lot of the time, oh, sorry, I'm chatting too much.
It's okay. Yeah.
But being able to walk along the Dnipro and share stories and culture and food is very lovely. But yeah, so there was this intimate space, but then what really amazed me, gorgeous Flora, was the expanse of the space outside as well. So here, this kind of gorgeous, deep, expansive space that almost just allowed for this sense of breath out. So it was really quite beautiful to play with this kind of contrast and depth.
Cool. This is the moment probably I love the best in this performance.
Oh,
when they just going away.
And
very
it's almost like
slowly.
their shapes just kind of disappear.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And what do you feel about the fact? I was talking about that in the previous interview with Maida, the artist from the United States. And what do you feel about the?
Oh, you've just pressed mute, Anton. I can't hear you. I think you've just muted yourself. The joys of technology.
Oh, okay.
What do I feel about the fact?
So, what do you feel about the fact that, like this work, for example, will never be shown again?
Yeah, well, it's a bit, I mean, I think there's kind of a sadness, but a beauty in that. You know, I think one of the strengths of dance is that it's so in the flesh, which is a difficult thing to kind of say when our lives are quite 2D during this kind of time of increased isolation. But I don't know. I think it's very special to be able to have these works of sight. So maybe if they only exist once, I feel like they can resonate for a longer time, whether that's through hopefully the dancers' experiences. Certainly for me, that experience will stay with me for a long time, and the learnings and sharings from those artists. But also I think for the audiences, particularly when working in sight, you know, if someone enters that space to see another exhibition, they might kind of remember this dance work that they saw there, or someone might walk past a particular street and kind of have a memory of how once these kind of dancers came in and transformed this space. So, you know, I think there's, I guess it's interesting in how things resonate afterwards. I hope.
Yeah. That's what I usually also thinking about. That it's interesting thing that there's a lot of work that we do just to show it once, twice, or three times, and we never expect to show it again, except something happened and somebody asked to do this, or there's another things happen in the world around us, and I feel like that would be that will be relevant to present it again. But yeah, this kind of memory about how these things happened, this have very special feeling, and even when you know that the things you do will never happen again, gives a very interesting aftertaste after this. Yeah, like this is a thing that can only exist in our memory and in our so to say in our heart. But
yeah, and I think that can be really special. And I think for me, which is why I'm increasingly more interested in not just a performance but a process. Like that process was really meaningful for me in Ukraine. And now I'm kind of thinking more and more about, particularly in this kind of strange time of COVID-19, you know, Australia experienced really like a tumultuous bushfire season this year as well, and kind of going, gosh, what is my role as an artist in this? Am I relevant? But kind of actually going, well, what, instead of thinking about what art can I make, I'm kind of going, well, what skills do I have as an artist? And one of them is maybe holding space for people and inviting and thinking of the value of a creative process. So a lot of my next kind of works are coming a larger mass works with, you know, 100 people that aren't dancers, bring them in and having conversation and inviting them into a creative process. Because I think for me, it's kind of then going, yeah, like how can the engagement be with our audiences be so be nice and deep and meaningful, so that that aftertaste lingers on for a long time. Yeah,
that's cool. And I know that you started and you were creating the performance in Hong Kong with Hong Kong dancers, and it was just at the time when the protests started. So can you tell some words about what was there in terms of creative process, what you were trying to create, and it's very interesting how the creative process overlapped with this protests in the country. And I remember that you were very much you very much feel this energy of the protests, and it impacted your work.
Yeah, I was working with 20 amazing young people at Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts, which is a university in Hong Kong, developing the stance. And this was in November, and I was very aware that I had been to Hong Kong before to do some research into, at that time was the umbrella movement, but the protests were getting stronger and more prevalent, and building in their momentum again last year. So I was kind of very cautious of going, well, how do we, what is it to be an international artist coming in? Which is there's kind of ethical things about that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to come in and create a work about protest because it's not my story, it's not my place.
Yeah,
So thinking about, well, yeah, and thinking about also kind of going, what is it to create a work about protest when actually there is protests happening on the street? There are people around the corner facing the reality of tear gas and arrests. And so kind of going, well, what I thought I could do again, it was about kind of making space. So kind of going, well, what is this space that I can create for these young people as they digest and reflect upon what's going on, and what do they want to say at this point in time? And maybe it was about building kind of a shared resilience, or supporting each other. And what came through really strong was coming through really strong was this idea of being together. There's a section where they just have to kind of really move slowly and be together. And what does that mean for them? And that came really strong. I mean, what also, unfortunately, the work, the situation in Hong Kong got more tumultuous, and with good reason, the performances were cancelled because universities were shutting down, and there was deep concern for the young people involved. And I think this experience was, to see the courage of those Hong Kongers, and the resilience and the strength and capacity to keep fighting for something they believed in was incredibly powerful for me. But also then the big question about thinking, what's my role as an artist here, and what's my responsibilities and care for the people that I'm working with? And those questions I'm still kind of working through, and a lot about thinking about, when there are communities in crisis, or we're experiencing challenging times, even like COVID-19, it's like actually there's something very important in creating a space for people to be together, to process things. But also there's actually a really important engagement with the body, of kind of thinking about, well, how, like, I think when we're in shock from experiencing things, which was prevalent in Hong Kong, like actually this state of shock and what that does to the body, like actually how to kind of connect with something more touch and tactile, how valuable that can be for the body. Or, in this experience now where we're more socially isolated, it's very hard to experience touch, but how do we, we can feel the overwhelm of the media. So what is it to kind of close our eyes and just check in with our body and move, even if we're moving together in different spaces? So I think Hong Kong was a very strong experience. And I think it's really put questions in my mind about the spaces that we can create for people as artists. Yeah.
Do you expect to come back there to continue your work?
I would really love to, and maybe it's not necessarily that work, but I have lots of dear friends there, and there's we'll see. I would really like to. I feel like I have long-term relationships with the countries the communities that I like to work with. And there are some beautiful dancers and creators there that I hope to kind of reconnect with. So yeah.
And it's I think it's interesting, especially probably for Ukrainian, for our local dance communities. What is how would you describe the dance community in Australia? What is the topics which is interesting for the artists, what they do, works about, what how they communicate? Yeah, do they travel a lot like you try to travel? Or what is the most important ideas for the local dance artists?
Well, it's interesting, I guess, because in Australia is geographically so large that you know, each different city has its own different kind of artistic identity in a way, and I feel like particularly Melbourne is quite a artistic hub. There's a lot of kind of a lot more kind of experimental dance. It's kind of a strange kind of thing to say, but like kind of really like looking at choreographic language and things like this. And there's a strong audience for it. In Brisbane, I find actually the community is a lot smaller. There's a lot smaller audiences for dance, and I feel like you know, that's probably why I go to my audiences as opposed to a theatre. Maybe they won't come to me, so I'll just go to them. But so I think it is actually, there's different very different things being explored in different places. So I think, for example, in Brisbane, you have to have a conversation in relation to audience, and that's kind of integral to the art making. Whereas maybe in Melbourne, and this is me generalizing quite a bit, but actually that is less important because there is an audience who will watch and are willing to take risk. Maybe in Queensland, in Brisbane, I have to be a little bit more careful about the risk I take and how I almost trick the audience into, you know, taking risk with them. And I think that there is a lot of travel even within Australia, because we are quite spread far apart. So I think that we have to kind of travel between cities, but often just by the nature of it, sometimes it can be we just, in terms of the nature of our funding, sometimes actually it can be easier to travel overseas, although this has all kind of changed recently with travel restrictions. But I don't know, I think I particularly love working across culture. That's a particular passion of mine, so yeah.
Okay, and probably we'll try to summarize, and I want to ask you to summarize, to give some important ideas, important ideas about why you think the dance is important in terms of in relationships to the people to artists who do the work, and also in relationships to the audience who see the works. What do you think make dance as a contemporary art form an important and relevant art form for our living today?
Such a big question, Anton.
Yes. But you have 5 minutes.
All right, so well, I think for me it comes down to it's the body. You know, we all have kind of bodies, and we all communicate through our bodies every day, so there's something kind of really powerful in that. But I do think there's something really interesting about for dance to remain agile and responsive to the urgencies and needs of our time is maybe to really think about how we experiment with form, and not holding so tightly necessarily onto kind of I think the tradition, well, I'm getting confused, but kind of thinking about the idea coming as the first thing, like what is the thing that you want to do? Is it kind of building communities? How do you go about doing that? Is it just through dance? Is it through dance in a particular space? Is it dance in a regional area? Is it dance classes? Or kind of going, actually, I'm really fascinated with how to communicate things about science and how do we comprehend science. And I go, all right, how do we go about that? Maybe we need some text, maybe we need a scientist. So I think it's about, for me, there's something really important about for dance to remain important or valuable, is kind of thinking about how we continually experiment with the form and experiment with it to make sure that it's kind of responding to things we need to. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting in Australia. There's a conversation around necessary and unnecessary things as budgets get tighter. But I think for me, thinking about how trying to build an understanding of actually how integral art is in our lives. You know, I think often some people might think about art as a ballet or an opera that some people go to and they pay money for a huge amount of ticket. But, you know, kind of actually going, well, maybe it is a festival in a small town that kind of activates its spaces and brings people to the local businesses and cafes to have food, or, you know, the kind of visual artists working with people that have challenges with mental health to try and help them understand their stories. And I think the more we think a little bit more broadly actually about art, we kind of realize that it's quite integral in our lives, and in kind of helping build community and shared stories, and to listen with each other, to empathize with each other, to hear diverse voices, to have dialogue, you know, to allow spaces for dialogue that extend beyond 140 characters of a tweet or a social media kind of argument that can happen. So I think actually there's art, when we think about art more broadly in kind of its capacity in this space, I think that it's indeed invaluable, and it's really critical at this point of time to build collective identity, strength, resilience, and joy.
Yes, yeah, and I I hope all of this we will go on with all this work we do, you do, and we do, and all the artists all over the world doing. Yeah, and we can have this kind of to have these connections between each other, and especially what dance can do, to have these connections through our bodies, not only through the internet and the social media, as we were isolated for, I don't know how long you were, but we were for 2.5 months almost without communicating with the people living around. Yeah, and that's why I think we need dance now even more, but mostly as a way of communicating through physicality, and start to reconnect us to each other and to the people around us. Yeah, thank you very much, Liesel. Yeah, maybe you can, if you want to add something, if there probably something I didn't ask you, so if you want to add something to the interview to finalize, you can do it right now.
Oh no, I just thank you so much for it's so lovely to have this conversation with you, Anton, and everyone that is listening. I think actually it's so important, these conversations, to take stock, to evaluate things. So I'm very grateful. Thank you for all the work that you do. And I hope to come to Ukraine and have some Veraniki with you soon.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, you definitely should come because you have been here. You have your ancestors living here, so anyway, you feel connection with Ukraine, and we will be happy to see you here at least once again. So
Yeah, of
let's keep
course.
in
It
touch,
will
and
happen.
we wish you good luck. And again, thank you very much for participating in the project. And thank you again, and thanks to our audience, and good luck to all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Mhm.